This will be a spoiler-free introduction to the novel Station 11, written by Canadian Emily St.John-Mandel. It is technically a post-apocalyptic novel, but there is no sci-fi in it whatsoever. In fact, Mandel has rejected that label. It should take about 9.5 hours to read, so it's average. It's not a long book. It's not a short book. Obviously, that number depends on how quickly that you read. So we're going to go through the main characters, and the images that I'm using for the main characters don't necessarily match their description within the novel. I am using images from the HBO miniseries that was based on the novel. Very, very different, however. I highly suggest that you read the book first and watch the movie second. It's a great miniseries, except that there is very little beyond character name and setting that matches up with the novel. In fact, just to give you an example, the novel is set in Toronto and the movie is set in Chicago. So even though those cities are very similar and get compared all the time, you can see how they are different. So our first main character is named Arthur Leander. He begins the novel obviously as this young kid who leaves Delano Island, which is way out west near Vancouver. Seems to be kind of a backwoods type of area, and he goes to college in Toronto and quickly drops out because he decides that he wants to be an actor. And he ends up becoming, the novel never says, but I think he ends up becoming just about the most famous actor in the world. The novel actually opens with his death, but I'm not giving anything away because I think that's on like page 2 of the book. And then we get to know Arthur through a series of flashbacks. Arthur is, in my opinion, not the main character of the novel, but he is the character that links the rest of our characters together. All of the main characters in the novel have some association with Arthur Leander, even if they don't have associations with each other, or they have passing associations with each other. This is Kirsten Ramon, and I would argue that she is the main character of the novel. Different chapters are narrated by different, or not narrated, but we get the perspective of different characters in different chapters, and Kirsten has the most chapters devoted to her. Kirsten's chapters are almost always post-pandemic. She is 8 years old when the plague spreads, and she's in King Lear with Arthur, the play that Arthur was doing when he passed away. She was actually on stage as Arthur died. Post-apocalyptic, she is a member, maybe the most prominent member, definitely the most famous member of this group of actors and musicians called the Traveling Symphony. And they travel around, I think, Lake Michigan. It might be Lake Superior. I don't think it's ever said in the novel. I've read the novel several times, and I don't think the Great Lake that they're traveling around is ever mentioned, but I believe that it's Lake Michigan. And they do Shakespeare plays. They do Shakespeare plays set to music. And Kirsten usually plays the lead because obviously she had training before the apocalypse came. And so that makes her the most talented actor in the group. Another main character would be Miranda Carroll. This is Arthur's ex-wife. It's also his first wife of 3. Arthur is a bit of a philanderer. He doesn't cheat on Miranda Carroll as far as we know, but he definitely has feelings for his second wife while already married to Miranda Carroll. It's I guess possible that he cheated on Miranda, but we never read anything like that. We just read the setup to the second marriage that's taking place and overlapping with his marriage to Miranda Carroll. Her importance in the novel is that she is the author of Dr. 11, which is a graphic novel of which will play a huge role in the post-pandemic. I mean, the book is named after one of the issues of Dr. 11, Station 11. Only 2 copies of this graphic novel exist in the post-pandemic. One of the copies is with Kirsten, who we've already met, and the other copy is with the prophet, who we're going to meet in just a couple of slides. Miranda is a shipping executive. She travels around the world quite a bit, and she is in a Malaysian hotel room when the pandemic begins, when the virus begins to spread. Clark Thompson is Arthur's best friend. However, they've kind of lost touch with each other toward as they get older. They were in college together, and Clark wanted to be an actor, but ended up becoming going in a different direction, while Arthur stayed in acting. When Arthur dies, there's nobody in his life to really take care of the funeral, and we actually never get to the funeral because Clark is on a plane on his way to Toronto to take care of the funeral when the plane is grounded in Michigan at this fictional airport called the Severn City Airport, and because of the plague. So the plague breaks out as Clark is on the airplane going to Toronto to take care of his best friend. This picture of Clark does not match the description of Clark in the novel at all. Doesn't even come close. But this is the actor who plays him in the movie. He's actually quite good. Jeevan Chaudhry is a really good guy who is in the first chapter of the novel. He is sitting in the play when Arthur Leander faints and ultimately dies. And Jeevan is training to be a paramedic. So he leaves his seat and jumps up on the stage and attempts to revive and save Arthur Leander, but of course he's unsuccessful. Prior to training to be a paramedic, he was a paparazzo, and then he became a journalist, and he as a paparazzo, he hung outside Arthur's house quite a bit trying to capture pictures of him, and then as a journalist, he gets an interview with Arthur that ends up being a pretty significant interview in the book. It happens a little bit later than halfway through, but it's a major scene in the book. And Jeevan brushes up against the character Kirsten Ramon. She is 8 years old, and he is on stage, and she begins to cry because Arthur has died. And so Jeevan helps find Kirsten's wrangler, the person that's supposed to be taking care of all of the kids in the show, and that is their only association in the book. If you watch the movie, their association is far greater than that. But in the book, he just gets to know her for a few moments, and then he goes one way and she goes the other. Every post-apocalyptic novel has a villain, and our villain in this book is called the Prophet. The Prophet believes that he is a Christ figure and that it is his duty to repopulate the earth. The plague has wiped out 99% of the people on earth, and the Prophet believes that it is his job to repopulate the earth, and he uses the graphic novel Dr. 11 and Station 11 as almost like a Bible, as almost like a guide as to how he should be repopulating the earth. And he believes that anybody who was alive when the pandemic first broke out is evil and part of the pandemic, and therefore should be executed, should be murdered. And so he only takes, and this is obviously disgusting, but he only takes child brides. I would say that the Prophet is about 30 years old in the book, and he's taking brides that are 12, 13, 14 years old. We are in year 20 years after the apocalypse, so anybody that the Prophet would marry and want to have children with to repopulate the earth would have to have been born within the last 20 years. They would have to be a post-apocalyptic child, so obviously they're going to be younger than the Prophet. We have several settings. There is Toronto before the pandemic, which is just very normal and a very non-fictional account of Toronto. We have Toronto as the pandemic begins, although that is a minor setting. We have the Severn City Airport as the pandemic begins, and then the post-pandemic. And the Severn City Airport is not a major setting until the last third of the novel, and then I would say that it is the dominant setting. The Traveling Symphony that loops around Lake Michigan, performing plays, that is the dominant setting, probably of the whole novel, but definitely of the middle, 100 pages or so of the novel. We are in Frank's house. That is Jeevan's brother. Jeevan goes there as the pandemic is breaking out. That is not a major setting. We have the King Lear play held in the Elgin Theatre in Toronto. I don't know if that's a real theater or not. I suspect that it is, though. That is where Arthur dies. That is not a major setting either. And then we have Arthur's Los Angeles home, where he is married to Miranda and where they have their wedding anniversary that ultimately becomes the end of their marriage. But I would say that probably the three dominant settings in this book are Toronto before the pandemic, the Severn City Airport, and then the traveling symphony looping around the Great Lake. Many themes in the book, of course. This is just almost a random list of themes. I would say that these are obviously major themes in the book, and if I talk about them very much, I would be giving away some of the plot. So I don't want to do that. But any post-apocalyptic novel is going to have the themes of change. They're going to have the themes of memory. They're going to have the themes of civilization. Illness is obviously going to be a theme. Loss and grief are going to be themes. But I think that this novel brings a few additional themes that other post-apocalyptic novels don't bring, such as, for example, connection. That is a theme in this book. I think a lot of post-apocalyptic novels actually have the theme of disconnection, but this one goes in a more positive direction. There is a sense of belonging, and I would say that many post-apocalyptic novels have the opposite theme in terms of belonging as well. So Mandel does some interesting things with the themes that play into why this novel is different from other post-apocalyptic novels. It is not a difficult book to read in terms of, like, if it had I'm sure it has a Lexile score, and I don't place very much significance in Lexile scores, but its Lexile is probably not that high, because a Lexile score is based on vocabulary and sentence structure. But the narrative of Station 11, I think, is really interesting because the chapters are from different perspectives. We get chapters from the prophet's perspective, chapters from Arthur Leander, from Jeevan, from Kirsten, from Miranda, and from Clark, and I believe that's the complete list of perspectives that we get. And we jump around. It is not a chronologically told novel. The setting of the traveling symphony, that is told in chronological order, but there are other chapters interspersed within the traveling symphony section where we have lots of flashbacks to learn about Arthur Leander and his beginnings in Toronto, and other characters as well, such as Jeevan and Clark Thompson. So it's a difficult narrative, I think, to keep up with, but by the end of the novel, the narratives come together, the strings are tied, and the disconnection that perhaps we feel throughout the novel is less present at the end of the book. Station 11 is not like other post-apocalyptic literature because it's not really that negative. It's more about getting the world back to order than it is the disorder and the chaos that is perhaps more stereotypical of other post-apocalyptic literature and television shows and movies. A lot of times it's about survival, and in this novel, because we are in year 20, they are kind of beyond that stage. I mean, obviously it's a dangerous world still, and they have to be careful about the people that they're meeting, but it's not dangerous in the same way as, like, for example, a Walking Dead might be, or even post-apocalyptic novels like The Maze, or Hunger Games, or novels like that, where there's still a huge evil in the world and the world needs to change. It's still negative. There was an apocalypse, and now in the post-apocalyptic world, in other novels, we need to tear that world down. In this novel, there's a post-apocalyptic world that we're building up. And so I think that we have a much more positive post-apocalyptic novel than we might have in other books. And then finally, as I said before, the HBO miniseries is really, really good. They did a great job, but it defies the novel in many ways. You've got all the same characters, but you've got very different relationships between those characters, and then you've got all the same settings, but the settings are used in very different ways, and even the ending is hugely different than that of the movie. The movie has the novel has a twist that the movie does not use, and therefore, because there is no twist in the movie, it changes the end of the movie quite a bit. So that is Station 11. I highly recommend this book. I also highly recommend the movie. I just would watch the movie after the book. I think that it is a really, really great novel that was written in 2014, 6 years before COVID, and that is, I think, scary and makes Emily St. John Mandel a little bit prescient. And I would say that if she could write this book in 2014, 6 years prior to COVID, that would suggest that we may not be that far from another pandemic, which is why I would call the book a little bit scary. But it is prescient in its writing, and it is obviously extremely relevant to today. So I hope that you will read it and have a good time with it, and I hope that this introduction helps you understand it right from the beginning.